Welcome back to Telltale. This video we are going to talk about a horror novel involving mutiny. And starvation and cannibalism and a ship of the dead and a lost tribe of people.
Basically everything that could have gone wrong in Swiss Family Robinson but didn't.
Yeah.
This is the R-rated version, essentially.
And this book was written way back in 1837 is when it was first published.
And guess who wrote it?
Edgar Allan Poe, of course.
It's the only novel he ended up writing, and in fact it was early in his career that he wrote it.
It was. He still had to write most of, like The Black Cat, The Telltale Heart, Fall of the House of Usher, The Pit and the Pendulum. All those were yet to come in his career when he wrote this. But he did feel that his short works were not selling, so he felt the pressure to write a novel in order to sell it.
Yes.
And it was first published in 2 installments, January and February 1837, in the Southern Literary Messenger, and then finally issued as a complete novel in July 1838 by a publisher, which I didn't note down. So, synopsis. Two bros, not actually like brothers, but like two really close friends. One of them is, his father is a captain on a ship, and they do a lot of trading and a lot of commerce stuff. I believe their ship in particular was it a whaling ship? I believe it was a whaling ship. So they were going out, do some whaling, and trade some stuff and do some things. And Arthur Gordon Pym, which is a pseudonym, it is actually written as if it's written in first person, kind of diary style. Yeah. As if the information had been passed off, though, to Edgar Allan Poe himself. So there's kind of an acknowledgement where it's kind of fun that way. Yeah. So, well, early in his career, he had an interest in hoaxes, and he did try to write some hoaxes, like the Hans Pfaall story, where this guy goes in a balloon, goes all the way to the moon, was supposedly true. And he tried to pass it off as true, but of course it didn't get too far.
No.
And this, again, he was trying to write it as if this was a true story.
Yeah, as if it was really happening and it was passed on to him. So Arthur tells his buddy Augustus, like, hey, I want to get on the ship. Of course his parents said no. Everybody said no. And so Augustus is like, I have an idea. We're going to smuggle you onto the ship and pretend that you're visiting your cousin that you visit annually a little bit early this year. So he plans this elaborate conspiracy, and it implements perfectly, and he stows away Arthur Gordon Pym on this ship in like one of the minor holds. And then suddenly Arthur goes days without seeing him. Like, just randomly. He kind of had, like, a few days where he had gone without seeing him, and then saw him, and then whatever. So he's basically stowed away with very limited supplies. Basically goes into, like, this feverish, dehydrated state. Suddenly wakes up, and his dog is there. And he's trying to figure out what the heck's going on. Finds a note on his dog. Hasn't seen his friend. Is out of water. Is out of food. The dog gets hungry. The dog kind of goes a little nutso on him. And he basically, like, bolts to try and get to the trap door that Augustus had, but he's, of course, in a fever, so he's really struggling through all of this. His mind's not fully there, he doesn't have the strength, all that stuff.
And he's in a hold where all this stuff shifted.
Everything's shifting, it's dark, it's crazy. And finally, he hears his friend Augustus in the hold with him on like the other side amidst some of the other debris between he and his friend. And Augustus finally somehow like digs through all the shit to get to him and moves through all of the supplies and tells him, oh, there was a mutiny. My dad and his buds were shipped off overboard and the crew took over and there's a big political dynamic going on, and
it looks like there probably is going to be another mutiny in due time.
Mm-hmm.
But he's been spared because he has a wealth of information still. So Augustus is still kind of an important person on the ship.
Yeah.
Even though people don't like him because he was the captain's son, they're like trying to decide whether they want to off him or not. So he's in a delicate situation here, but nobody knows that Arthur is still on this ship.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, a conspiracy kind of starts to happen where Augustus teams up with the first mate and a few other people, I think. And they decide they're going to take the ship. And they're going to use Arthur because nobody else knows other than Augustus telling his friends, hey, I have a plan that's really going to, like, blindside them. Because Arthur, my friend, is stowed away on the ship and no one else knows he's here. So we have one more person to recruit, and we could definitely come up with a plan to really throw everybody off their game and take over the ship. So, of course, it's a dark and stormy night. They decide to overthrow the ship. They do successfully, only to end up shipwrecked. Because the gales were so bad. But the ship doesn't fully sink because of the type of cargo it has. So the ship doesn't fully sink, but the ship can't do shit.
Yeah.
So Arthur, Augustus, Parker, and one other person. I can't remember the other one's name. Peters?
Yes.
Yeah, Parker, Peters, Augustus, and Arthur are the only ones who are on this ship that have survived since this storm. Because they had to kill the rest of the crew because they couldn't risk another mutiny. But of course, then they were shipwrecked. So they go for days and days and days without much success getting anything out of the hold that's sunken where the food supply is. And finally...
Because it's flooded.
Because it's flooded, because they're half underwater but not fully sinking.
Yeah.
So they're basically just the main front end of the deck.
Yeah.
Is all that they have.
Mm-hmm.
So finally, someone in a very desperate situation says, one of us needs to die so the rest of us can live. Of course, nobody's really thrilled about the situation, but at the same time, they're desperate. So they all draw straws, and I think it's Peters ends up pulling the short straw. They kill him and eat him. And then they think that they're about to be saved by another ship that's adrift, but it ends up just being full of people who died of yellow fever, and it's just adrift on the sea.
And that scene is just so
it's
beautifully
really
described. It's creepy,
really grotesque, and well done. That was, yeah. So, like, this whole story is just a series of unfortunate events. Eventually, they get picked up. At least the only survivors get picked up. Eventually, I don't want to spoil too much. But then they end up getting to this island with this lost tribe and all this stuff.
Yeah,
and
well, they get on with a ship that's intending to explore Antarctica. Because
yes.
There haven't been very many expeditions to Antarctica. And at that time, the ones that had gone down there, like Captain Cook, only got to the ice and they didn't get through to the actual continent.
Yes.
And so nobody knew if there was, at that time, if there really was a continent down there.
Exactly. And so they go to try and explore. At first they start exploring some islands that they think are supposed to be there, but some people have said, we've gone to that location and they're not. So they're kind of like here and there trying to figure out amongst themselves whether or not these islands exist, and then proceed the rest of the way to Antarctica. Meet this ancient tribe. I'm going to stop there because it just loses its mind after that. Like, if you think things can't get worse, they do.
Yeah.
It's just like really, it's like Swiss Family Robinson, except if everything went wrong. Absolutely everything.
And very creepy.
Very creepy.
With an ending that is very mysterious.
Yes.
And nobody really quite knows what Poe meant by it.
You definitely don't get closure.
Well, it depends on how you interpret it.
I interpret it as, you're not going to get the rest of the story because mysterious circumstances.
Well, technically in the book, it's said that there's a couple of missing chapters.
Yes.
That finish the story off, and nobody can
knows
find
where
them,
they are.
and so nobody knows where they are.
Yes.
But I think as far as what Poe is trying to get to, there is closure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, well,
might have to reveal some spoilery stuff. This is a 200-year-old story, so if you haven't read it, you might want to jump ahead or something, because I'm going to spoil certain things. At the very ending, it's just the two of them, Arthur and I think Parker. Whichever
Parker.
one didn't get eaten.
Parker was the one who didn't get eaten.
Okay, the two of them are left, and they capture a ship, a canoe, from this tribe and escape from the tribe.
Yes.
Because the tribe is going to kill them all. And
then they're stuck on the Arctic Sea.
That's a part that I feel was very weak about the book.
Yeah, it wasn't that dynamic or interesting.
Well, it was very interesting, but you have this tribe. They purposely kill all the people who own this fabulous ship.
And then they destroy
And what
the
do? They destroy the ship. This thing the ship alone is wealth beyond anything they've ever imagined. And could give them the freedom to get to all kinds of other islands they've never been to.
He does also, we do have to admit, Poe is a product of his time and culture. He does not make this tribe look smart in the first place. It is implied that they are a black tribe, very much like African tribes, and that they are black-skinned, and a lot of racial things, a lot of very racist things said.
I don't know. I've heard that some people think this whole book can be interpreted as against blacks and for whites. I'm not buying that because it's
I don't think it's against blacks and for whites. I think it's just written from ignorance.
First of all, I think the choice of having the natives of this South Seas Antarctic island black is just because all the South Seas islands that people knew about at that time had black natives populating them.
Yes.
So I think that's just extrapolating that the further south you go, you're going to run into more black people.
And scientifically, it also makes sense, too, that they would have more melanin because there is always light. It's almost always light.
Yeah, well...
According to the story as he wrote it, there's hardly any night and day.
I would think they would be like
Eskimos
light. Who are darker skinned.
Yeah, darker skin, and of course, light reflecting off snow.
Yeah.
If they're in those areas,
the further south you go, it starts getting warmer, so it's not all that cold where these natives are.
Yeah, but they still are going through areas on the water and things like that where light is reflecting back at them. So them having more melanin in their skin makes more sense, scientifically speaking. He does not speak well of them, though. He calls them savages. He calls and he writes them to be very stupid.
Right, but now Poe had gone on sea journeys and had seen what really happens on ships, which is why half of this book is just talking about how ships are run.
Yes,
and how you sail, and there's a lot of latitude, longitude throughout it, which was kind of above my head because I don't remember the latitudes, longitudes so well anymore.
I didn't worry about that so much, but I did appreciate the things he describes in there and kind of gives you information because I know nothing about seafaring. Well, so having a description was really helpful.
At that time, no ships are like that anymore.
Yeah. So it was nice that he had those descriptors and gave like reasonable explanations. He also described penguins really adorably. I love how he describes the penguins.
And while a lot of the things like the death ship and something else where they came across a ship that was just kind of going, and he talks about a shipwreck that actually happened. It was a real life.
Yes, there are some actual events that are referenced in this book.
And he's talking about it. So a lot of what makes up this story before they get to Antarctica is based on real world experience. Yes. This stuff was actually happening to sailors back then. And so it's terrifying, but it has an extreme realism to it that I think is awesome.
And I find, too, because it's an earlier work, the tones are not typical of what we read when we read Poe. There are glimpses of it as he's developing his voice as a creative and as an author.
Oh, as far as the style?
Yeah,
it's easier to read than
it is a lot easier to read, actually, than some of Poe's stuff. It's less cryptic, it's less poetic, and it's just very much telling you the story from the perspective of Arthur Gordon Pym.
But it is still his impeccable writing style.
Yes, it's still fantastic.
Very well written. It's
Top tail.
His language is still...
Top tail.
Oh, yeah. His language is still a joy to read, even though it's not as much as what his later fiction. Mm-hmm. Even the next one we're going to review, Ligeia, which was published in 1838, I believe. That one, you get into more of the language like you have in Fall of the House of Usher and stuff. Yes. So a little more densely written in the style than what this is. But this still has...
It's fantastic.
The awesome Poe writing style. It
is fantastic. The horror is realistic, but also very... it's a good spooky read, for sure.
Historically, at this time, there were only a small number of books about seafaring like this. Mm-hmm. Moby Dick had not been written yet. Mm-hmm. Poe pulled his influence from a number of factual
occurrences, actual ghost ships,
books that people had written that Poe had read that were about seafaring. Mm-hmm. He drew upon his knowledge of those books to write his book. But he was also influenced very heavily by, of course, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner.
Yep.
In which there again, the albatross, I believe it was the albatross, figured very prominently, which it did in this book. So Poe is making a direct reference to Samuel Taylor Coleridge and the Rime of the Ancient Mariner,
a lot of allusion,
is a heavily religious epic poem. An awesome poem, one which we have to review one of these days.
We will get to it for sure.
And so the whole weird ending of this, I feel, is very much paralleling the Rime of the Ancient Mariner.
Yes.
And so I think it has more of a religious significance, not a racial significance.
No, I definitely don't think the racial significance... I don't think there is racial significance. I think it's just him writing as a product of his time.
Yeah, I mean,
it's very small
lived
part.
in Virginia
it's not
in 1840s.
Huge. Yeah, it's
Civil War hadn't happened yet.
Yes, and the beliefs and ways he described his culture is very much how I think most colonists would have written and described a culture similar.
Yeah.
So I mean, but the Antarctica, as he writes this, is beautiful and absolutely fascinating. I love how he wrote and described that. It was like, what is it? Out of the Silent Planet level.
Yeah.
Description and originality.
And
really
at that time, nobody had yet actually been to the continent of Antarctica, so he just let his imagination go wild.
He just went, just let it fly, and it was fantastic. I enjoyed that. Far more than what the actual continent is like.
Yeah.
But, definitely a fantastic read. Really enjoyed it. I liked the descriptors telling me what things were. I found that very informative because I wouldn't have known what half those... The different decks of a ship, I was not familiar at all.
I don't know anything about ancient seafaring.
Yeah, the bulkheads and what any of that stuff was, had it not been described, I would not have known what it was. But his descriptions are fantastic. They're very vivid. The characterization is really well done. And it's not a long book.
No.
I think it only took me like 2 or 3 days to get through it total. Yeah. It's a really fast read. The type is actually quite large. The version I have, it was published by Manning and Mason in 1838, by the way.
Ah.
That was the publisher.
Yeah.
The version I have is a Xerox copy, recovered, that Craig gave me.
And this one, I got this... This wasn't what I ordered, but I received it. And instead of going through the hassle and expense of trying to ship it back to the person, I thought, we'll just keep it, read it, and compare with other more expensive versions of this book and see how it holds up.
Yeah. One of the other things I really enjoyed about this book is that this Xerox copy, you can tell to the latter half of the book, you could tell the typesetters were really fucking tired. Like, Poe is still very wordy. No matter what, even though this is much more plain language than what we're used to with Poe, he's still very wordy. And you could just tell that authors did not think of the typesetters who would have to set this and print it eventually when they were writing. And, like, as I'm going through this, Like, there are parts where... I wish I had marked them. But, like, the letters are not lettered correctly, so that things are not, like, some of the letters are, like, jacked up and down real weird or jump around, and you can see that in the latter half of the book.
Rivers in that text.
Yes, there's a lot of rivers in the text. They did a lot with the way they did this. Yeah. Yeah, you could tell the poor typesetters halfway through the book are just getting exhausted from doing this.
So this is a Xerox copy from the original edition?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
That's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm. And you can actually see in this first bit here, Poe actually wrote his own name.
Oh, yeah.
As a correction.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is really cool. It's basically a Xerox copy of the first edition. But yeah. It was just kind of funny, though. One of the things I noticed as I was reading, like, there was the word "like" just went like this in one part. Because the letters just were, like, jumping around. You could tell they did not set it appropriately. They were just... Done was better than perfect at that point.
So overall, reading experience with this probably print-on-demand published book.
Yes.
That these things typically sell for $30. Mm-hmm. What did you think about it? Do you think it's worth it to buy these kinds of books?
I think so. I kind of liked it for some of the quirky things that were in it as a Xerox copy, essentially. Mm-hmm. I felt like it...
But the quality of the book was
Quality
good?
wasn't terrible.
Wasn't
tiring
to hold? It laid open?
No, it's actually very lightweight.
Okay.
The paper... I'm a sucker for deckled edges. Mm-hmm. So these being straight-edged was a little... They stick together a little bit, so about halfway through the book I was pulling pages apart a little bit from it being cut and printed and stuff. Only at the tops, though, like up here, probably in this last half.
Probably wasn't cut quite right.
Yeah, so I ended up having to do this a few times to kind of like pull the pages apart. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I actually felt like it was fine. And the size was good. It has these very generous margins, so like my fingers had a good place to be. I was not dissatisfied with it. And everything was printed very clearly. Mm-hmm. My concern was having parts that weren't printed clearly. There were also some figures.
Yeah, those are original to the book.
Figures original to the book.
Those are all of my copies.
Yeah, describing caverns and things that they were exploring.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there were very few imperfections or hickeys or anything. Like, it looks like they did a good job of actually upping the contrast so that stuff didn't show up.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I felt like this was actually a really good addition.
Okay.
Despite everything.
Okay.
So
I don't like all the covers on, you go to one of these companies, all the covers look the same.
Yeah. They have this very standard,
kind of boring.
Stark, boring cover. But otherwise, it was actually a really nice pleasure to read.
I actually read from 3 different copies. Because for lack of time, I was reading it in between waiting for things to process at work. Mm-hmm. So I had an ebook, the Delphi ebook of the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, which was very good, except the problem with most ebooks, especially of public domain works, is you're going to get typos. Mm-hmm. They make a lot of mistakes. They don't do a very good job of proofreading the ebooks before they put them up.
There's probably 1 or 2 typos in here, but I didn't see very many.
Yeah, but checking for them in my published editions, those typos aren't there. So it's mistakes that whoever did the Delphi versions was making. I've noticed that in other Delphi books also.
Yeah, somebody's just not careful.
So this edition is the Heritage Society.
Very nice.
Heritage Press edition. So it comes in a slipcase. The straight edge slipcases of Heritage are a little difficult to get them out sometimes, but they don't usually make them so tight that you have a big difficulty. This one just has Pym's signature on the cover, so not a spectacular cover, but not bad. Still has the sand glass, which is important with any. This gives a little bit of background on the book, and came with Heritage Press books, and it's really important to find an edition that still has that in. So this has the original illustrations that she was showing of those caverns.
And those are the only illustrations that there are, other than the one in the notes at the end.
But you can probably see this is a larger than normal book.
Oh, that line spacing is quite large, too.
Huge leading with huge point size.
Yeah,
it's
my book
bit
can
bigger
fit
than
in your
yours.
book.
And
My book's
and
just
that
a baby.
the way they did it makes it a lot thicker than what is really necessary for Arthur Gordon Pym, but it makes it easy to read. So you don't get tired trying to read it.
Yeah, you don't get very fatigued eyes. That's nice.
Which is nice. Beautiful black and white illustrations.
Oh, there's more illustrations.
Yeah, so these are original to the Heritage Press
Peters!
Society. Yeah.
The ass hat.
You don't get these illustrations in other editions, just the Heritage Press edition. Well, Heritage Press and the Heritage Press books are actually a lower value reprinting of limited edition society books, which were published very expensive.
I like those illustrations. Those are very nice.
Yeah, they are. And well, Heritage Press books, of course, are all used. Heritage Press is no longer in business. They were merged with the Easton Press. Bought them out.
Yep.
So these books are not being printed, so you have to get them used. You can get most Heritage Press books for between $15 and $40, which is, for a nice collectible book, is a really good price. This is the Folio Society edition. Very small, way smaller. This is like paperback size,
That one can fit
but it's a
in my
hardcover.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Thicker, though.
in reading the Heritage and the Folio, just holding them, I found I like the Folio best.
Yes, it's a
I
nice,
really
good
like
hand
this.
size. Especially for people like me with tiny hands.
Yeah. I usually prefer a little
I
bit
like
bigger
little
than
books.
this, like the octavo size.
I really like little
But
books.
This one was a joy to read, and has, the cover illustration here. It's kind of a raised ink. I'm trying to remember what that was called. They used to use it for business cards in the way
Lithograph?
back when. No, it's
Screen print.
it's a type of ink that was like a vinyl ink and would be.
Ink. I don't. I
and would
keep going
always
to
be
bubble ink or
raised.
puff paint, and I can't.
No, I
Brain.
want to say flexography, but it's not flexography. It was called something like, it would start with an F. I used to have business cards that were printed that way. Anyway, it feels like that's how this was printed. And this, I believe, was 2013.
That has a cool illustration on
This
that.
has some awesome illustrations. You got to see the one.
Mine
for-
didn't have any, but that's okay. Other than the figures that are
Oh,
original.
this is when he was.
When he was trying
When
to
he was
pretend
trying
to be
to
the dead
pretend
guy.
to be the guy that died.
The corpse of the dead
like
guy
he
who
came
died.
back to life.
Yeah, to scare him.
That is
And
cool.
yes,
And-
there are a lot of parts that we didn't talk to you about in this. We gave you a very brief overview, so please
Yeah, well, read it. We
it's
don't want to
so good.
spoil everything for you. That's
Yeah.
the Death Ship.
Ooh, yes.
Very,
I like that part.
Very cool illustrations
Yes.
in this edition. And interesting how Folio Society changes the sizes of their books all the time. Sometimes their books will be really small like this. Other times they'll do really big ones that don't fit on my shelves. And I don't know why
I
they
like
make
the
those decisions,
eclectic
but
style, I guess.
I like this one.
Yeah, that's cute.
I really like
That's
this
a good
one.
side.
That was my favorite edition to read from. And that one, again, it was published in 2013, so it's not in print anymore. I had to get it used. I think I paid like $40 for it, but
That's
it
not
was
bad.
worth it.
Yeah, that's a really nice
It's a collector's
edition.
edition.
Yeah,
So,
top tail. We loved it.
oh yeah, definitely. This is one of the all-time greats. It really blew my mind.
Yeah.
I had never read Arthur Gordon Pym because it wasn't.
I didn't even
it
know
was-
it
it was
existed
always-
personally.
Well, when I had read about it, people always described it as not being finished and not being very, not having like the normal kind of Poe.
Yes,
Horror?
those were the criticisms. And that's probably what was most apparent to me, but it was still really good.
I think those criticisms are baseless. I think there is an ending. It's an ending that refers to, as I said, Coleridge and the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And it also, it is very horrifying. The description of that ship, of the people who all died of yellow fever, was
Yeah.
one of the most terrifying things I've ever read.
Yes.
And this is 1837.
And that whole cannibalism thing, like, that was very, like...
Well, he did that
intense.
Tastefully. He didn't go into too many details.
He did it very tastefully. He did a really good job of the intense emotions that Arthur was experiencing in the situation to really build it up, but still have it be tasteful. So you understand the horror and the sense of desperation that everybody was in. So it was really good.
Yeah,
Great spooky
it was amazing. It was mind-blowing. It's perfect for October. We suggest you run out and get a copy and read it. Don't stop for red lights. Just get to your book.
Yes,
get this
immediately.
book and start
reading. The internet is your friend. Find a version that suits you.
Yeah,
it's really good.
It's public domain, so Project Gutenberg, of course, if you're on a budget. Otherwise, use bookstores. Barnes & Noble has copies. Online,
it's a
Amazon,
for how
everybody.
It's really interesting because I had no idea. Like, I love Poe, and I had no idea that this even existed. But it's remarkably accessible for a book I didn't know existed. So,
and of course, it's set a long time ago, but it doesn't feel like I'm reading an old book.
No,
it felt really contemporary.
The language was it was very contemporary style language, and I think it's because of the plainness of which he was expressing his experiences. And it's a very human voice. And it's no nobility. Like, a lot of, I think, Poe's works are nobility, trying to sound like, it has this eloquence set above, almost self-righteous, I guess, is probably, like, the self-righteous sound, because a lot of the main characters are nobility, or, people who are a big deal. This was just some kid. Some kid who fucked himself over by doing something stupid, and it just continued to be all this series of unfortunate events.
Yeah.
It's just nuts. But it's good.
But this book, it was criticized when it was published, heavily criticized for how gruesome it is. And which only makes it feel more contemporary, because it is... It goes far beyond what other authors would have written in 1837.
Yeah.
But also, it has had a very, very strong influence over a lot of authors. Most notably, Herman Melville, Moby Dick.
Yep.
Melville admitted to being heavily influenced by the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym when he wrote Moby Dick. And Jules Verne.
Another book that typesetters hated.
Because of how long it is.
Yes. Also the B's and the D's. If you're doing those in lowercase and letterpress, you are mixing them the fuck up all the time, because their letters are backwards. So...
he also influenced Jules Verne. Jules Verne wrote a sequel to the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym called An Antarctic Mystery, where he has an expedition go back looking for what happened to the ship.
Very nice.
Haven't read that yet. I've got it. I want to read it.
Continuation. I love when authors buddy up.
Yeah.
Like, I think some people get really that's not the original though. And I'm like, yeah, but don't you want more of a story? As long as it's good, who cares?
Yeah.
Just don't beat it to get death.
Another heavy influence, of course, was H.P. Lovecraft. At the Mountains of Madness, Lovecraft admitted that he was heavily influenced by the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym. But now Lovecraft gets a lot more into cosmic horror and gets a lot more descriptive of weird creatures and stuff, which you won't find in the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym.
You'll find sharks, though.
Well, and there were some weird animals.
Yeah, in the Arctic.
The natives down there were some odd mammals and stuff, but they were just different. They weren't monsters.
Yeah. And in fact, the one they found was not very large, so.
No.
But yeah.
And, of course, you can find contemporary novels that remind me a lot of the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, most notably The Terror by Dan Simmons. Which is Arctic, and that's based on a real story.
History. There's also a mini-series about that is fantastic. Yeah, so good.
But that one, even though it's a very different story, still felt a lot like Arthur Gordon Pym in many ways to me. So I gotta believe Simmons was influenced by Poe when he, even in the choice of doing that story.
Yeah.
I think he wanted to do something like Arthur Gordon Pym. So this is an important horror early novel,
especially for those
over a lot of other things.
Yeah, those horrors, especially that are seafaring specific.
Yeah. And since it is the sea, and since it does go to such deep lengths to describe what it's like to be a sailor in 1837,
it's a no
Samantha needs to read this.
Samantha, read this. Bound and tagged. Do your thing, girl. Yeah, and it's a really quick read. Like, you'll have this done in a night, I'm sure. The way Samantha reads.
Yeah,
for sure.
On a weekend. Yeah.
Yeah, in a weekend. Yeah, if you're busy. But yeah, definitely a really great piece of work.
It is.
I loved it. And again, like I said this about Hodgson as well, I feel like the sea is a great place for horror because there are still so many unknowns. You literally are up shit creek without a paddle. Like, you are at the mercy of the elements. You are at the mercy of nature. And nature does not give a shit about you.
Oh, yeah. We forgot to mention the sharks.
Yeah, the sharks. The sharks. There's a great several chapters where the sharks are a problem.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, definitely a good read, guys. We beat this one to death, I'm sure. With how great it is.
This one needed a lot more in-depth discussion. It's an amazing book.
Really a series of stories happening within the same narrative.
Well, it's an adventure. That's why I said in our chat, I feel like I just read Poe's Odyssey.
Yeah, it literally is an odyssey.
It also reminds me a lot of Homer's Odyssey.
Yes, it is an epic. But everything just keeps going to shit.
Which is exactly what happened to Odysseus.
Indeed. It's just a series of unfortunate events on the water. That's basically what happened to Odysseus too. So go get a copy. Go read it. Enjoy it. Like, subscribe. I'm done. You done?
Yeah, just come back for more.
Yeah.
You got a lot more books to read.
Tell us your thoughts too. Like, the end is fun to interpret.
Yes.
So have fun with that. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.